This is the Gang of Witches Ibiza podcast, hosted by Jo Youle. Each new moon, we'll explore with our guests how to think globally and act locally with ecofeminism. Awaken all your senses. The spirit of the witches comes to your ears. The Sabbath is that way. Gang of
witches. Welcome back to the Gang of Witches Ibiza podcast. And since this podcast began, the island has been going through what feels like a huge period of transformation. In the last 2 years, without the usual influx of tourism, other avenues of revenue and exploration are beginning to open up, and all eyes are on the land rather than the sea in the same way. The attention is turning inland and in turn inward as to how we can create our real hopes and dreams for what the island could look like if it wasn't completely reliant on tourism in the same way it has been for the last 4 decades. New ideas are on the table, new regenerative agriculture projects are popping up, and with them a huge focus on how we can produce our food and how this could in turn become a way to positively impact the climate change crisis, but also take the power back from big corporations and keep our food sovereignty firmly at the forefront of what's important. Now, one lady has been having a huge impact on all of this and putting fire into many of the local food ideas and projects, and also helping create the communities we need to make this happen. Gabrielle Gambina is the co-ordinator of Ibiza Produce. She's also a chef and an ayurvedic consultant, and she wishes to bridge this gap between the food creators and the local farmers and the restaurants that buy their produce. She feels the farmers are misunderstood, and since meeting and making friends with this community across the island, she's sort of beginning to realise that a solution was needed to smooth out the meeting of the two so that they could actually support each other. Ibiza Produce was launched to make people aware of exactly what grows on the island and when, so people can better source seasonal, local, island, fresh, high-quality products, but also find out where to buy them and, more importantly, who grows them, and a little bit more about why we must place so much importance on buying local food. So it is a huge pleasure to have Gabrielle along for today's episode. Gabby, welcome to the Gang of Witches Ibiza podcast.
Hi, Jo. Thank you. I'm happy to be here with you.
So I think, for the benefit of our listeners, let's begin at the beginning. I mean, what was it, that made you feel Ibiza Produce needed to be set up as part of Ibiza Preservation?
The project was born out of a study we did. We carried out a study for 6 months under the Ibiza Preservation umbrella, where we met with the various stakeholders of the food sector, from the farmers themselves to the cooperatives, various organizations and associations related to the agricultural sector. We met with the agricultural college, with the various government departments related to the food sector. And through this study, it was obvious that there were a number of bottlenecks that needed to be addressed, starting with an aging farming population straight through to distribution of the product. So it was kind of along the whole chain, there are various issues that we needed to address. And from there, Ibiza Produce was born as a project funded by Ibiza Preservation.
From that research, can you ever see a future for Ibiza where we rely solely on the food that's produced here?
I feel very positive. Since we did that research 3 years ago, we launched Ibiza Produce as a project in order to make people aware of what grows on the island, where to source it, who grows it, and the importance of why to buy local. And since then, we have seen big improvements in terms of distribution of product, in terms of the amount of farmers that are growing produce on the island, particularly in the summer months, the expansion of land being cultivated, even from existing farmers, and also a move from conventional farming to organic farming and regenerative agriculture. So there is a lot happening in this food sector, and I think it's all very positive, and the only way is up really from this side.
I think that was a song by Yaz.
It was one of my favorites in the 80s. No, I definitely think, I mean, just seeing the number of customers that today are buying direct from farmers is a sure sign that people are changing the ways they perceive their weekly food shop. We also have a new farmers market that started at the end of last summer here in Ibiza. It's part of the Cooperativa, the agriculturist cooperative in San Antonio. And there we have about 13 farmers who attend the weekly market, a number of consumers that turn up regularly to buy their products from there. And this not only includes fresh produce, but we also have almonds, sobrassada, breads and pastries, cheese. So it's changing. It's starting to follow a trend that we've seen in other places abroad, or Barcelona, or even further afield.
I mean, I guess it's not, just about the people consuming the food in terms of, their weekly shop, but it's also, there's a lot of private chefs on this island, as we were very honoured to experience the other day at the Gang of Witches house. We had one of those wonderful local feasts, and I was really quite blown away at your car full of goodies, which were all obviously fresh from the farm. I mean, I would say that chefs have a pretty decent responsibility to also source their food locally, because, as we've talked about many times on this podcast, that 2% idea of the food being produced here is actually eaten here. But I think that must increase exponentially over the summer, as we know. But there must be a hell of a lot of private chefs that come here, and maybe they do a little bit of a mix and match from supermarkets and from the farmers' fresh produce. But I think really the onus is on them. Just as you turned up that day, fully armed with all those wonderful items, I think it's important that really should be encouraged, if they're going to be making lots of money out of the people that come here on holiday, to actually get that produce fresh from the farm.
I agree. I think there are two sides to the coin, right? There's the consumer, who needs to be educated and to demand that the food that the chef is preparing for them is from the island, is organic, is local. And then you have the chef, who obviously has a budget to work within. So it's not as straightforward as we think it is, right? Also, a chef is working within limited time as well, and would like to source everything from one location if possible. As a chef myself, I know how challenging this can be, and to plan for a meal where you want to use as much local as possible, you may end up going to 3 or 4 different producers. So what we are trying to do as Ibiza Produce is to encourage collaboration between farmers, so that one can have as wide a range of produce from one point of sale. That's the idea. I mean, the goal in the future, I would say, is to have a proper distribution center where fresh produce arrives, and you have both a wholesale arm, if you like, and also a retail arm. So where chefs can come directly there to buy the produce, or they can actually order in from the wholesale side of things. So I think we still need to do some work along these lines in terms of making it easier for the end consumer, whether that's the chef or the consumer himself, in order to make it as accessible as possible. Then, of course, there's always the issue of price, and when you have an intermediary like a distributor, the price will reflect their margin. So for a chef who needs to obviously make his own margin, he also needs to analyze, okay, what is it worth me going direct to a farmer and buying at cost price, if you like, or do I buy through a distributor where I save time? So there's this time versus price kind of arguments going on there. So I think there's still work to be done, but we're addressing it for sure.
Why did you feel such a passion or an urge to get involved in this story? I mean, what was it? I mean, you're not from Ibiza. You've kind of come over here from Malta, and this, has become your baby.
Yes, for sure. I mean, as I said, I'm a chef and I'm an ayurvedic consultant. So for me, eating fresh, local, seasonal is of utmost importance. It's kind of I don't even think about it. It's the norm. But when I come across people who have never been on a farm, have never bought fresh produce that has just been picked, I just want them to get that feeling, to actually go and experience what it means to meet the farmer who's grown the product, and to ask him questions and to find out, how this product was grown, and all the passion and love that farmer is putting into growing that produce. I mean, personally, when people eat my food, I can see their reaction, and I know, okay, there's this part of it is my skill, but I think it comes down to actually the product itself. How fresh is this produce, and the energy that's vibrating from the product.
I think you're absolutely right on that front. And, there's a very real sense of disconnection with our food source. And it's not until you actually see that stuff coming out of the ground with your own eyes that you really understand not only the hard work that goes into it and the complexities of actually farming, but also, for example, when I stayed on a farm in England, house sitting at a friend's house not that many years ago, and I was surrounded by cows and sheep, and I mean, I didn't eat any meat for a really, really long time after that, and that must have lasted more than 6 months, because I just really, when I was looking at cows in the eye every single day, that desire just completely left the building. And I think that's, it's important, I think, to somehow, if you are, for example, even going to think about eating meat here, to go to Camusson and, meet those ethical kind of outdoor farms where, those animals are being, well looked after. But I think disconnection from food, I think, is the number one problem that we sort of experience on this island in many ways.
Yes, I think knowing the source of your food is really important, and everyone plays a role in this, whether it's the restaurant, whether it's a shop, whether it's the consumer. We all should know where our food is coming from. In terms of animals, you were mentioning animals on the island. I think over the last few decades, less and less animals were being bred here on the island, and now there's an effort to recover certain breeds from that are part of this island and part of Formentera, such as the black pig, that is known for the sobrassada that is made when the matanza takes place over December and January, and also sheep and goats. We have a few goat cheese producers on the island and goat milk producers, and then also the recovery of the donkey, the Balearic donkey, Asno Balear, as it's called in Catalan. And these all play a very important role in the ecosystem and in the recovery of the soil and the nutrients and the carbon capture of the soil. So there's a number of projects now taking place that are all geared towards bringing more animals onto the land in order to create a whole ecosystem, not just having a vegetable patch, because that's just one part of a larger puzzle, if you like. And I think this is not only thanks to, obviously, the Ibicencos themselves, but also to a number of expats moving to the island with knowledge that they're bringing in from other places around the world, which is great, because that way we share this knowledge and we build upon the experience. And the thing with regenerative agriculture is that it's all about trial and error, and practice and experimentation. There is no set rule, there is no structure, if you like, on how to go about creating your farm, but it's about knowing your terrain, knowing the climate and the location and all the factors that impact the soil and the environment that's around you on the farm.
I mean, obviously, as a chef, that's the number one reason that this kind of resonates so strongly, this story and this kind of project for you to be working on. But I think, what was it that made you move to Ibiza specifically and get involved in this?
I think they're unrelated, actually. So I moved to Ibiza because I had left Europe and I was living in Asia for a while, and there I was very much in touch with nature and with everything that was growing in Asia. So I learned a lot about the local products there and how to use them and experiment with them. But I was missing the culture that we have as Europeans and the food that we have here. So I chose Ibiza because it was green, because of the beauty of its natural landscape, and because there's also the option of the civilized part, shall we say, of all the restaurants and activities that go on this island. And as soon as I got here, I wanted to get involved with the natural side of this land, and I lived in the north of the island, which is kind of the less developed part, and I had this opportunity to get involved with Ibiza Preservation. I really love all the projects that Ibiza Preservation encourages and funds, and from there it just kind of grew. Like, my network just grew. I would meet one farmer who would introduce me to another farmer, and then it was just a beautiful community that I came across on this island. And from there I also met a beautiful chef, and together we created some amazing meals just based on fresh farm produce from Ibiza. We set ourselves various challenges on how to utilize the products here in a creative way.
I mean, I've seen you in action at those Ibiza preservation meetings, and specifically the final meeting of our wonderful previous podcast guest Sandra Benveniste, who's sadly leaving Ibiza Preservation as director. But when I witnessed, I don't know how many women exactly, maybe 10 of you around that table, all women, all, very passionate, laughing your heads off and interacting very passionately. And, that they looked like a lot of not just fun, but like you were really, getting down to business.
Yes, I think this island is blessed with some very determined women activists, and the energy of each one of us encourages the other. So it's great that we have this network and that we can help each other in terms of the work we're doing. We have people who are focusing on the elimination of plastics in the environment and encouraging and educating people about plastics. We have other people talking about sustainability in terms of climate change. We have people looking into the marine environment and the preservation of Posidonia, which is fundamental. It's the lungs, if you like, of our ocean, of our sea. So I think what is beautiful is that we all bring together our knowledge and we share that, and we build upon each other's experience. And we also approach the third parties, if you like. Say, for example, we go to a restaurant, we can talk about, local food, we can talk about waste, we can talk about packaging and elimination of plastics. So there's a wide range of topics that can be covered in terms of the breadth of this organization.
It looked like some very heavy breathing was going on there. It was I kind of wanted to take a photo of it actually and send it to you, because it looked like a very lively, actively engaged group of women, really enjoying each other's company, but obviously sharing some very interesting things. And I think you're clearly a food activist. I guess, what was it then that really kind of drove you to take this story forward? Not just the data and the project, but there must be something else in you that kind of makes you want to spend your time kind of inspiring other people to make a change.
I think the most inspirational moment for me was meeting the farmers themselves and seeing and finding out the challenges that they have to face on a daily basis and wanting to help them. I think it's just this kind of a compassionate side of me which came out in terms of, how do I go about helping these farmers who are wanting to share their beautiful produce with the world, but seem to be misunderstood. And what I found was, by speaking to the chefs and to the farmers, there was some kind of gap in communication between them, because the farmer would say, I'm happy to produce beautiful crops for a restaurant as long as the restaurant commits to buying that produce, and that the chef accepts the fact that not each tomato is going to be the same size and look identical, and there may be times when we have a delay in the growth of the crop or in the maturity of the crop. So it's really about bringing these two parties together and explaining and seeing each other's perspective. And I think that drove me, because I could see both points of view, And I just wanted them to be able to collaborate and to really make this happen, because at the end of the day, they're both doing beautiful jobs. One is growing this beautiful produce, and the other is actually serving, creating amazing looking dishes and amazing tasting dishes for the customer who is here on holiday and wants the best of the island. So I think for me that's what probably drove it home, the fact that we can create something so special here as long as we collaborate and we listen to each other and we work together.
How are the farmers misunderstood?
So a farmer works long hours on the ground in the field, and the problems, if you like, that come up when you're a farmer are things like the seeds. Is the seedling giving you the right crop? Working with the elements, whether it's rain, sun, wind, working with pests, making sure to protect the crop from any plagues in a natural way. And therefore, the focus is 100% on that physical activity, with very little time and mental capacity left to do marketing, commercialization, distribution, and accounts. So I think farmers and restaurants have different objectives. For a farmer, growing the produce is his way of life, and it's his survival. So selling that product at the right price means a lot to the farmer and his survival. Whereas a restaurant, for a chef, it's a buying decision, whether to buy from this farm or the other farm or from mainland, and it's more kind of a business practice rather than a lifestyle.
It is, and I'm so glad that we've explored some of that through the course of this podcast and the challenges that are faced and the difficulties. And I think, one of the positive things that's come from the spectacular and rather unusual times that we've just been through recently is the rise of, people wanting to obviously not go to the supermarket and actually get food from the land, that it's obviously going to be better for their immunity, but also the fact that they don't actually have to mingle while they purchase. But, veggie boxes has really rocketed, and I think that that's a very good thing. And I have spoken to quite a few farms that I've been buying my own veggie box from, and I think that has actually almost maintained the same sort of level of production, which I think is incredibly positive, for example.
Yes, I think food sovereignty is now here to stay. There's been a lot of coverage over the media and on various podcasts and blogs about the importance of our food and where it comes from. And in terms of what you're mentioning about food boxes, veggie boxes, I think we're seeing more and more farms preparing these veggie boxes and selling direct with delivery, which is a great thing. And then we also have farms where people just pop by the farm shop, and can choose from a selection of vegetables available. I think on this island, Ibiza is very lucky in the sense that it's small, so everywhere is pretty much accessible. Every farm is accessible. And people really enjoy that connection, that contact with the farmer. And going on from there is, on the island we have a cooperative called Eco-Facious with 14 member farms, organic farms. And they've experienced a huge rise in demand over the last 12 to 15 months. And thanks on the back of that, they are now ready to move on to the next level, if you like. They've been around for about 8 years, this collective, and in the first years it was all about learning. Most of them are part-time farmers. They have other jobs that they've studied and been working in. There are lawyers, designers, school teachers, and they've encouraged each other to take up this path and to go back to their roots, if you like, to safeguard traditions, family traditions and family culture. And therefore, the first few years of this, of Eco-Facious has been about growing the product, testing, experimenting, learning. And now it's kind of reached maturity, if you like, and it's ready for its next phase in life, with this year having planted twice the amount of fruit and veg that they had 2 years ago when we were in our normal demand phase, shall we say. And in order to fund the expansion, we're running a crowdfunding website, encouraging people to donate and get veggie boxes as a thank you. We're working with a number of local enterprises to fund various aspects of this development strategy. We have managed to fundraise for the purchase of an electric vehicle to be able to deliver to restaurants with an isotherm, so that it's refrigerated on the inside. And then the idea is to help also in terms of visibility of the cooperative, and that will be done both physically with signs at each of their member farms, so that when people are driving by they can see this is a member farm of Ecofacius and they can stop and make their purchases there. And online, in terms of an online website where one can buy product online, and also through Instagram and social media, other routes of social media, to be able for people to know who these farmers are and what they're producing and where they can buy it and when, opening hours, all of that. And there's going to be a new premises in terms of where customers can go and collect their products from Ecofacius, which is currently being refurbished. So this is kind of the next step for this cooperative. And the way we see it is if this cooperative manages to improve its operations and professionalize all its services and the quality of the product also, then we envisage that more and more farms would want to be part of this cooperative. The most important element, I think, is that they manage to increase the number of consumers that they reach. That's the key. Once they establish themselves further in this market, then I think more and more farmers will join this cooperative, and therefore then we can expand and we can have a proper organic market on this island.
I mean, we know our sort of podcast hero, Helen Norberg-Hodge, is a big fan of a farmer's market. And, it just feels like this island is very scattered. I mean, if it's not just, trying to find a yoga class, down a tiny Camino in the middle of nowhere. And, it's a bit like the farms, like they're all scattered. And, it's not like, as you said, for the chef who wants to go and buy everything, they can scoop everything up in one go. It's like everything is all over the place. And that does feel like the answer, to have all of this stuff under one roof at a local farmer's market or a cooperative where people can go and get everything they need in one go. For me, that sounds like the dream, basically, for that all to be happening in one place, and for a very kind of alternative style of supermarket.
Yes, definitely. And for now, Ecofacius is the answer to that, because as a chef you can also have the food delivered directly to the villa or wherever you're working in the restaurant. And yes, if you prefer to go to a market and choose your own produce, which I think a lot of chefs love to do that, there is a farmer's market, as we said, in San Antonio. Right now it only takes place on Fridays, but of course if we see demand increasing, then there may be more days added on.
I had this kind of flash of inspiration the other day, and I was thinking about this situation with the 2%, and obviously the rise and fall of consumption. But the honest answer perhaps to part of the problem could be, obviously for 3 to 6 months of the year the demand has increased to such high levels, but if people lived here all year round, then maybe, just maybe, that it could be possible to keep that balanced way of supplying food across the year a little bit smoother and actually meet demand, which would maybe mean eliminating houses that were not being lived in for less than 2 months a year, for example. Because no matter what we say, the local economy is only going to ever thrive with a more consistent level of input across all 12 months. I mean, that for me feels like a possible solution.
For that to happen, a number of other things need to happen. You would need to increase airlift, which is the number of routes by air to the island, and how often and frequently we have flights to the island. That is ultimately what determines how many people live here or travel here. So if we, for example, wanted to extend the tourist season, which is what the tourism authority have in mind, we would need to firstly increase the routes to the island. Secondly, we'd need to work with the local accommodation sector in order for them to stay open longer. And thirdly, yes, all the rest of the infrastructure, so the restaurants, the food production, all of that would follow. So that would be the determining factor. We cannot expect to have the same level of tourism year-round as we have in the summer months, because that is why people love Ibiza, because they can come and enjoy the sunshine as well as the nature and the landscapes. So there will always be a few months of the year where tourism will be limited, and we see that all over the world in all types of tourism destinations. In terms of people coming to live here, I think there's a capacity also that we won't be able to go over anyway. And I think it's a good thing that there are planning restrictions on how many houses can be built, particularly in the green belt, in the green areas of the island. So while, yes, I agree that having a more constant production throughout the year would help farmers, we also need to be aware of climatic factors also that impact what can be grown in the winter months, for example, with the rain and cold and the humidity at night. So I don't think we will ever reach that utopia of having year-round 12-month consistent demand, but that we flatten the kinks, the fluctuations. Yes, I think we're starting to see that happen. We've seen that last year as well in the months of October and November. And hopefully this will be the trend going forward.
I mean, yeah, that would be the dream. And it just, in my head, that makes perfect sense. But I guess you can't invent a law to stop, people only using holiday homes 2 months of the year, and the rest of the year it's empty. And that also not just affects food production, it affects everything, right? It affects the local economy that Helena talks about a lot. And, it's really important for that to be thriving. And the only way that can thrive is to eliminate people that, buy a big fat house here and only come here for 2 months of the year. It doesn't feel the tourism structure and infrastructure has to change. That was going to be, one of my other questions. I think, you've been here for quite a number of years now. And I think, if you could actually design the tourism landscape of Ibiza, what would that look like if you had 3 magic wishes and I was a magic genie in a bottle and I just washed up right here in San Juan? What would that look like for you, though? Because we are in this period of extreme change right now. We've had a rest from extreme tourism for the last 2 summers, and it has been magical. And I think it's the question on everyone's lips, like how could it be restructured, and what would be, if you didn't have to worry about the detail, if you could just magically wave your wand or my wand. How would you magically change, how that works?
Okay, you said 3 wishes. I think it's kind of one large wish with various layers to it, if you like. So the way I see my utopia for this island is that every farm becomes a destination in itself. So you'd arrive at this beautiful green field, and there you'd find routes around the farm with animals, with guides, with water features, with just beautiful landscaping. And then you'd have your veggie area, so the veggie garden, you'd have the fruit trees, you'd have areas for activities, you'd have picnic areas, you'd have a cafe, you'd have an area where you can buy all the beautiful jams and preserves and breads and cheeses made with products from the farm. And then you'd have maybe a kitchen where people can learn how to make these beautiful products. And it'll be a hub of activity. So every farm becomes this gastronomic destination in itself.
This is for tourists to come and visit. That's what the kind of tourist that we'd be attracting.
That's how I would see it, for sure. I mean, from visits I've made to various visitor attractions around the world, including vineyards, for example, I I think that would be, it can happen, and it can be a beautiful tourist attraction because people want to learn. I think today tourism is about experiences. It's not about lying on a beach any longer. So they want to learn about local food. They want to try and prepare something themselves. For example, a class of yerbas, how to make the local alcohol that is served here after every meal, with an assortment of about ranging from 21 to 25 different herbs that are foraged. So part of this experience would be foraging and learning how to pick different herbs, and also then like milking a goat could be part of that experience, right? So that's the activities. Then I would see also, like, the second layer, if you like, is some kind of sustainable accommodation for at different price ranges for different groups of tourists, right? From your students to your couple to your family. And each of them can then actually get involved with what is happening on the land. So, for example, you could have pony rides for children. You could have classes in how to sow seeds or how to germinate seeds, how to make cheese out of goat milk. There's a range, a plethora of different ideas that you can have, activities that would include all types of tourists that come to your land. And I think thirdly, most importantly, is having local people, Ibisencos, teaching about their culture and storytelling, which is really, I think, key for all age groups in terms of understanding where you are, why am I here, and what is special about this island, as opposed to staying in a standardized hotel, which could be anywhere in the world, right? It's actually knowing the destination that you travel to. So that's how I would see this island really going forward. And in order to do that, yes, we need the help of the government, both local, Balearic and national, to fund this kind of tourism and to encourage it and to create routes and to create maps and activities and give the permits required for something like this to go ahead. At the moment, I think, unfortunately, there's a bias towards your traditional hotel and tourism sector and not really geared towards a greener economy and a greener tourism practice.
Once upon a time in Ibiza with Joanna Ruby.
You will find that many of the oldest houses of the island have a north-facing window with a cross painted above it. These crosses were said to offer the household protection against malevolent spirits blowing in on the chill north wind. Keep those witches from your door. Keep those witches from your door. There she is gathering salt from the Salinas plains. There she is, gently pulling away the loose fur of a stray cat in Sarpenya as it sweats and molts on an evening in early summer. There she is, cradling a dove's egg beneath her heavy woven shawl. There she is, placing a bundle of lavender and a lit candle at her local well. You will find one old house up a mountain near San Mateo, with a cluster of 6-petalled rosettes engraved around the door. These symbols have been found on houses across Europe since the 12th century, warding off all darkness and all evil. Keep those witches from your door. Keep those witches from your door. There she is at Escuiram, chanting incantations for the rain. There she is gathering yarrow to soothe a mother after childbirth. There she is steeping St. John's wort for Pepper, who lost her husband at sea. There she is, walking the red fields and singing after dusk. You will find a funny bit of island folklore around those villages where the houses are still marked with symbols. They say that on Ibiza, the crosses and the 6-petalled flowers were not to keep away the witches. They were to welcome them in. Keep those witches at your door. Keep those witches at your door.
I think agro-tourism would be a beautiful, beautiful thing. I mean, I've been on holidays where I've been fruit picking or doing all sorts of weird, wonderful things actually in Australia. And, I think that's even when people go on a kibbutz or whatever and they stay somewhere for free and in exchange for getting their hands dirty. But I think that's what everybody wants after what we've just been through in the last 2 years. Everybody is just craving, after we've all been locked up in our concrete jungle for this length of time. Everyone wants to get their hands in the soil and feel that connection and feel that community vibe. And I think that's a beautiful way to expand the very limited offerings. I mean, I remember Marina Cardona in episode 2 of The Farmers, The Rise of the Rural Women, and she talked about in all the tourism brochures, you see all of these farms, that's a selling point to bring people here, but actually there's not a lot of money going into the farms to support the farmers when actually, they are using that to, pimp out the economy, but actually there's no real money going in to expand that idea, because I think it's a beautiful concept, and I think it would absolutely attract a very, very different kind of tourist. I mean, let's move on to your Ayurvedic consultancy, and I see that you're hosting a little workshop on positivity, which I thought was rather lovely, because we talk about, all of the terrible things that are happening from the climate change perspective and, from an eco perspective on Ibiza. But there's so much, other beauty here. And that's the number one reason that, despite all these gripes and concerns, like anywhere you live in the world, that you stay and that you moved here and I moved here. And at the end of the day, it's about mindset and framing things in the correct fashion, I think.
For sure. No, I just want to touch, I'm going to combine. So I'm going to touch back on the point that you just made about people sharing and doing things together and activities together. And I think despite there not being enough impetus and backing from government, what we're seeing is more and more expats moving to this island and creating those communities here on the island, all focused on agriculture, regenerative practices, whether it's agriculture or culture per se. So it's regenerating as opposed to sustaining, because sustaining tends to be a fixed point in time, whereas regenerating is bringing something back to life. So it's a beautiful thing that's happening on this island. And in terms of positivity and mindset, yes, I'm totally with you. We can spend hours dwelling on all the negative impacts of tourism on this island and all the partying and whatnot. But actually, let's be positive. Let's look at all this beauty that surrounds us and how we can regenerate it and keep it going. One of the things that we're working on is the almond trees, and how to create an interesting, if you like, visitor attraction, but in a strategic and structured way, as to help the locals of the Pla de Corona, which is located in Santa Ynez, in terms of they give a lot to that land with their time and their love for these almond trees, and the tourists that come there to visit, especially in the blossoming season in January, creating an activity in which the tourist gives back to this island also. So yeah, positivity. It's all about how we appreciate and give gratitude to everything that is around us. And I think, as you said, we both live here, and there is a reason why we are here, because this land keeps on giving us. And let's remember that the goddess is Tanit on this island, and the female energy you mentioned earlier is key, and I think we feel it and we tap into that.
Absolutely, 100%. And yeah, I just think that's the reason why there's just so many amazing women that live on this island, like you. So thanks for that. I think from the perspective of Ayurveda, this ancient Indian holistic healing system, which you also work within as a consultant, what do you think would be sort of considered a healthy diet here? Because we've talked about, obviously, in our fish episode, this idea, that's not a sustainable system. That was the narrative of the film and the inspiration behind making that episode. As we heard from that conversation, it's a very, very difficult subject, and there's lots of elements and ailments. But to say, never ever eat fish again, absolutely don't be eating meat, or I think it's more about balance, and obviously there's a very specific system that you work with for that. So I think it'd be interesting to get your take on that.
Yes, I think Ayurveda is all about having a balanced nutrition and a balanced lifestyle. It's all about equilibrium. However, it's as opposed to what everybody thinks, that you are what you eat. Ayurveda is about you are what you digest. Each one of us has a very different digestive system based on our doshas, on the elements that are within us. But I think fundamentally what is important is that we eat local and fresh, because it has the most nutrients. So a crop that has just been picked is at its best in terms of its nutrients. And the more time passes, the less nutrients are in that vegetable or fruit. It starts to die, basically, as soon as you take it out of its food source, right? So that is the most important thing. Now, whether it is meat or fish or veggies, it's important to have a balanced diet. You need to have a good range of protein in your diet. So you could get that from legumes, for example, or nuts. We have the most amazing almonds on this island. You can make nut milk. You can make all sorts of desserts. You can make bread with almond flour. There's a lot of things that you could create. And I think it's all about the love and the vibration that goes into the food. And that's what Ayurveda is about, is how the food is grown, how you treat it when you are cooking the food, and preparing yourself mentally for that food intake, that consumption. It all plays a part in how you digest that food. So I think, there are some basic rules in the Ayurvedic world, but it really is common sense, and it's about slowing down, which is key. And I think on this island, that's probably one of the best things that there is, that it's all mañana. It's very slow life, and it's very good for our health and our mental state.
I mean, in terms of, one of the biggest climate change things that people talk about is the fact that you need to eat less meat to support this crisis that we're facing. I'm not specifically talking about here on Ibiza, but globally this is a massive issue with industrial farming and, a lot of forests being chopped down, and obviously emissions at an all-time high because of cattle and the excess, I think, of food being farmed and created that possibly exceeds need, really, in this world right now. I mean, from the perspective of Ayurveda, is what is the theory on animal protein, as people call it, in terms of the diet, to live a healthy, balanced way? I mean, what does that look like?
I don't think there is a set percentage, if you like, of animal protein versus other types of protein in your diet. As I said, everybody is different. Some people would need animal protein more than others, depending on your constitution and on your state, your physical state in a particular point in time. You may go through a period where you really need to have animal protein in your diet, and there may be other times where you don't necessarily need it. So it's about getting to know yourself, getting to know your body, and definitely Ayurveda has no set criteria on animal protein in terms of whether you should have a certain intake of it or not. Dairy products also are important in some people's diets, but not in everybody's, and also it depends on the time of year, because There are certain times of year where we need more animal protein and certain times of year where we don't need as much. So for example, now we're in the summer season. What we really need is fresh product, salads, tomatoes, anything that can be eaten raw is actually quite good. Not for all dosha types again. Some doshas need to have broth, maybe animal broth, bone broth, if you're recovering from certain diseases such as cancer or autoimmune diseases. Bone broth is really important because of the nutrients in it. So I think each case is very individual, but definitely some form of animal protein is needed in your life.
I don't know, it's an interesting one, because the more I do this podcast, the less attracted I am to eating anything of that nature, and I've more or less, moved away from that whole story, directly influenced by the conversations I've been having. And I must say, I never feel as good as I do when I eat directly from the land, in terms of the veggie boxes that I've been getting, and, obviously the produce that I've been sourcing purely from the women that we've been talking to. And I think, that's interesting. I didn't really know that, that was even possible, if I'm really honest. I didn't think, that I would be feeling as good and as energized and as healthy as I do just eating, beautiful organic vegetables from Ibiza.
That's where the disconnect comes in that you mentioned earlier. We have been brought up to buy everything from supermarkets, and a lot of packaged goods or ready-made meals even, that we actually forgot what it means to just eat a carrot, for example, or an apple, or something so simple, can be so full of nutrients that you don't need the quantities that we have been used to. And you mentioned this just now with the amount of cattle that is being reared just for human consumption. We don't need the same quantities, because we are not, the majority of us are not doing physical manual labor on a daily basis. And therefore it also depends on our lifestyle. So our intake goes with the lifestyle that we have adopted. So I would say, really listen to your body, try eat as much as fresh produce as possible. Greens, we need a lot of greens in our diet, that's for sure. But we need a mix. Don't limit yourself to one type of food, because I've seen that in some extreme diets where you just focused on, I don't know, only on animal protein or only on leaves. You need to have, even just the colors are important, to have a colorful plate. So you could have green, orange, red, purple. They all bring some nutrient to your body that you need. We need a combination of minerals and nutrients in our body.
And what was it that, drew you to Ayurveda? I mean, specifically, I've spent a lot of time in India, and I've always felt like that's something I'd like to learn more about. So I think it's a beautiful practice and a philosophy.
It definitely is, and it's holistic, and I think it impacts everything within us and around us. And it's based on the 5 elements, which are present in everything. And therefore, it makes total sense. Everything that was created through this, or was stated through the various Vedas, is relevant. This was created over 6,000 years ago, and it's still relevant today. And that just goes to show that, no matter how much we evolve, we're still made up of these 5 elements. Everything is, and whether it's the time of day, it's the season of the year, everything is made up of the 5 elements. And for me, Ayurveda resonated with me, and I thought, I just want to know more. I want to know how everything is interrelated, from my mental state to the way my organs are behaving, to the way my body feels. Everything is one. We are all one, and everything is connected. And therefore, if I am emotionally upset, it's going to be reflected in my body and how I feel. in how I look. So I think the most beautiful thing you can do is understand who you are, who you really are, and heal yourself. And this is the beauty of Ayurveda, that you can teach others how to heal themselves without needing to rely on third parties or on chemical medicine. It's all about connecting with nature and with yourself.
I mean, food is one of the biggest medicines that exists, really. I mean, we've got every single thing that we could possibly need growing right, here behind us, probably, because we're pretty much in the thick of it, as you can probably hear from all the wonderful animals that I've heard so far. I've heard goats and sheep and cockerels. But it is incredible. Just like all the answers are more or less pretty much inside us, and we'll find the answer eventually. We'll always find the things that we need to fix us, medicinally growing right here on the land. And it's kind of insane, specifically at this moment in time, some of the things that are going on. And you have to look at indigenous communities around the world that rely on the things that grow in their immediate vicinity, and they are always the things that they turn to fix themselves. So it's one of the things that disturbs me, I suppose, somehow, is that indigenous plants are flown from around the world to this island and come here as medicines, but they're not being used by the people that found them in those communities. They're not even connected to those communities. And this is just like real drugs and pharmaceutical medicines. It's like it's not coming from the authentic kind of place that it was discovered and used and to work within the community, because of the environment that they're in. And I think that's what fascinates me most, is that, as you said about the 25 different herbs that go into hierbas, for example, that acts as a digestive after you've had your food. And I think that's a really interesting thing, that, Ibiza does have such an abundance of amazing herbs that are used in lots of food and wonderful recipes here, because they work within this environment, right?
Yes, for sure. And that's how Mother Nature is, right? She gives you what you need at the time of year when you need it most. So here in Ibiza, wherever you walk, whichever month of the year it is, you're always bound to find something, some plant, some herb that is growing and that serves a purpose. Every herb or fruit serves a purpose. And this is why we should eat seasonally and from what is around us. But as you say, I mean, there's a lot of knowledge, particularly in the abuelas of Ibiza. When I say abuelas, I mean the older generation who lived here all their life and have passed on knowledge from one generation to another.
At the end of the day, it's the only time I would ever mention this on this podcast, but it frustrates me that food is not talked about in the current crisis, like enough or at all, in fact, as the solution. It's like, medicinal food, eating certain kinds of foods raises the immunity, which fights off infection. And it's just like, food is so intrinsic to our well-being, not just, from eating it, but, being connected to it, being on the land, doing the kinds of activities you just mentioned that would be the dreamy tourism scenario. I mean, these just all just feel like very natural conclusions that I just often get very, just a little bit confused about why they're just not, I guess they're just not, they're not commercially viable. I guess that could be one of the fears, that, they're not going to be utilised or brought in any great hurry, because obviously the island needs to recover economically, and obviously falling back on the usual ways to make money are probably the natural kind of safety net that one tends to turn to in these times when money needs to be made. But ultimately I have real hope actually for the future of Ibiza, and I think I think things are already changing, and the kinds of people that are coming here is already changing. And I'm really glad you mentioned specifically about the expat community and the positivity that comes from that integration of real knowledge and heritage and practice and history and culture, combined with new new learnings. And I think the two things together is becoming incredibly powerful, as you've already seen already with the almonds. There's lots of these wonderful little pockets and projects, and even the likes of Jess coming in last month and talking to us about the land, the land bank project. Like, things are changing and they are moving in the right direction. And I think that there is real, as I said, change on the land of Ibiza, even in the last sort of 20, 30 years.
Yes, for sure. I think when you mention your frustration, the only way we can see change on a large scale is a change in our level of consciousness. Other than that, I think each one of us is responsible for her own part that she or he plays in this scenario, in the whole economy, including the food economy. And I think we each have to start taking action today. We cannot rely on some global intervention from an organization, a government, whatever it is. I think we need to change the situation from bottom up, grassroots level, and that's where big change always comes from. I think people in general are aware that food is such an important factor in their life, but maybe some do not have access to the knowledge and the wherewithal of how to go about making a change. And I think we, the ones who are more connected to the land and to this whole food economy, are responsible to start making those changes and letting people know, such as through this podcast.
I mean, that is the last conclusion I drew when I was looking into how to sort of talk about this topic with you. But it's it's interesting. Obviously neither of us are from here, and I feel like the kind of person that actually decides they are not satisfied with their own community and environment and lifestyle and way of being, that picks up sticks and actually moves to another country, is searching for something more, and that usually comes from a change of perspective and a desire for something better than they already have, be it weather, be it environment or people. There's a lot of obviously refugees. I mean, I think the UN released some figures this week, and there's so many displaced people in this world. There's a lot of movement, and there's a lot of unsettledness at the moment. But I think specifically people that decide to go and live somewhere else, which is what I think that this island is full of, are people that are looking to be healthier, be more connected, be more in a community of like-minded people who actually care about where their food comes from and how to sustain the health of this island. And that's an interesting thing, because even though sometimes expats here aren't maybe put under the lens of the most positive angle, but I think actually there just is a lot of fresh energy that's coming in with a very different take on things, because they're not beaten down and trodden down by the story of the past. They're looking for how to build a brighter future, and that is the number one takeaway that I think I've experienced firsthand in the last 6 months of connecting to a lot of the people that I've actually been meeting through you.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we are lucky because we are at a point in time where positive change is something that we can all make and we can all play a part. And I think Ibiza is probably going to be a beacon for the rest of the world in terms of how this change can come about from a group of very determined people who want to make this a world worth living in and creating a future for the generations to come.
And I just want to actually thank you for all the work that you do, because it really does genuinely inspire me on a daily basis lately. And I'm just loving making this podcast and all the wonderful women that I get to meet. And that's been largely down to you. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Jo. Thanks.
It was the Ibiza podcast of Gang of Witches, hosted by Jo Youle. See you at the next new moon. Until then, take care of yourselves. Ciao. witches everywhere, my witches everywhere. I'm calling upon my sisters everywhere.